Now, depending on who you talk to or hear from, Phase 4 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe is going to be anything from a fiery, disastrous end to what's been the most impressive film franchise in history, to being its best, most interesting, and diverse phase yet. And quite frankly, when coming at this as objectively as possible, it's obviously going to fall somewhere in between those two extremes. The real question being, where exactly? And I'm sure everyone at Marvel Studios right now is crossing their fingers hoping that a good number of people won't see Endgame as the end. And yeah, I know a lot of you will quickly point to the success of Spider-Man Far From Home and say the MCU is going to be just fine. However, that movie is riding off the wake of Endgame. It also features Spider-Man of all characters, easily one of the most recognizable and popular characters, not only in comics, but anywhere. And Tony Stark or Iron Man factored heavily into the marketing campaign and the film itself. In other words, it has a lot of things in its favor that a movie like The Eternals won't. And no, I'm not about to predict doom and gloom for the MCU. I'm not about to bet against Marvel and their track record. I fully believe Phase 4 will not end the MCU, nor will it be their biggest phase yet. And let's be as real, fair, and honest as we can be about things here. There will be some people that check out after Endgame and Far From Home. There will also be others that won't feel the need to see every one of these new Marvel films, especially since we're not currently building towards another Avengers movie. Then there's the fact that at some point you'd have to imagine comic book movie fatigue will likely set in. I mean, we've been bombarded with these type of films now for over a decade, and though as a comic book fan myself, I'll never personally get sick of them, or at least I don't think I will, there are plenty of people who will just stop caring and won't feel the need for another go-round on the Marvel train after Endgame here, especially with Iron Man and Captain America, arguably the heart and soul of the first three phases of the MCU, now out of the picture. You're also going to have people, for varying reasons, that aren't interested in some, most, or even all of these movies and Disney Plus shows that are coming in Phase 4 here. For example, I kind of see this phase as filler until we get to the X-Men and Fantastic Four in Phase 5. Not saying I think these films in 4 are going to be bad or that I don't want to see them, but they have nowhere near the same appeal as the X-Men do, for example, especially the thought of X-Men films brought to us by Kevin Feige. And speaking of those films and shows in Phase 4, let's take a look at what we've got coming, and I'll give you my brief thoughts on each of them. And if you want to just skip to the part where I talk about Thor Love and Thunder and the character or gender swapping thing that's going on in films right now, I'll include a timestamp in the comments below. First up here, we have a Black Widow standalone film coming out next May that will obviously be a prequel. And I'm not quite as excited about this movie now as I would have been to see it before the character died in Endgame. I mean, I'm still excited for it, don't get me wrong. Scarlett Johansson has killed it in this role, and if anyone has ever deserved to have a movie made, it's both her and this character. That said, I wish we could have had a Black Widow movie that came out before Endgame and was put in the slot that was given to Captain Marvel. It could have then taken place between the events of Infinity War and Endgame and be all about her relentless hunt to find Hawkeye, as well as her dealing with some demons from her past. You could certainly keep Taskmaster as the main villain, because I do like that choice for her. All this then gives even more weight to that scene in Endgame where they argue about who's going to give their life. Though, yes, the movie would potentially offer spoilers for Endgame since it'd have to take place after Thanos has been killed, but there could have been clever ways around revealing that information if done right. This then saves Captain Marvel to be the movie that officially kicks off Phase 4, instead of inserting her introduction into Phase 3, just so she could have a small, mostly irrelevant part to play in Endgame. Moving on then, in fall of next year we have Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which will be on the Disney Plus streaming service and see the two team up against Baron Zemo, the villain from Civil War that many people probably forgot existed. And I'm actually a little surprised that we're not getting another Captain America movie with Falcon now wielding the shield. Nevertheless, as someone who's enjoyed both these characters in the MCU, I am looking forward to this. Next up and coming out in November of next year, we have The Eternals. And I'm going to be honest here, I read my first Marvel comic book sometime in the late 80s, and I've been reading them on and off my whole life. But I don't know the first thing about The Eternals. They have never ever been on my radar, and I think that goes for a lot of comic book fans. I could be wrong, but that's just the feeling I get. Though maybe, like with Guardians of the Galaxy, who I did know about and enjoy before they had a movie, Marvel can take a relative unknown team and turn them into the next big thing, but I don't know. The following February then we'll be getting Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, which again, being honest, is a character I know very little about and have never had much interest in. The coolest thing I've heard about this movie so far is that it's going to introduce the real Mandarin, not the fake one we got in Iron Man 3. That spring we'll then be getting another Disney Plus series, this time being WandaVision, which are two great characters that I'm happy to see get more screen time, especially together. As for what we know about it, well, Elizabeth Olsen has said that it's going to get weird, and I can only imagine she means because this show will tie in directly with the film that's coming out in May of 2021, that being Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, which has been described as the MCU's first horror film. And yeah, you can sign me up for a horror-style film featuring Doctor Strange and Scarlet Witch. Also coming out in spring of 2021 will be Loki, another Disney Plus show. And though I love Tom Hiddleston's Loki and he's been one of the best overall characters in the MCU, I really don't know how excited I am for this. It's going to be about the Loki from Endgame, the one who, in the past or during the attack on New York from the first Avengers movie, picked up the Tesseract and disappeared. And yeah, I guess following a Loki who is more on the evil side and hasn't grown into the character we saw in Infinity War is kind of cool. But I don't know, I think I'd rather have a story about the real Loki, not a story about an alternate version of him. After that, and in fall of 2021, we'll be getting another Disney Plus series, this time one about Hawkeye, where he'll apparently be training Kate Bishop. And if you don't know who she is, she's a very popular character from the comics who also goes by the name Hawkeye. And this is another one that I'm fine with and will no doubt watch, but I don't know if I'm super excited for it. Okay, now before I get to Thor Love and Thunder, let me just very quickly give my thoughts on the other 4 movies that were announced but no release date was given. First there's Blade, which might just be the movie in Phase 4 that I'm looking forward to the most. Once upon a time I couldn't imagine anyone but Wesley Snipes playing this character, but then Mahershala Ali came around and I have zero doubts that this guy can nail the part and that this will be a good movie. Then there's Black Panther 2, and though I loved him in Civil War, I was less a fan of his actual movie. The idea of kind of reaffirming that he was Black Panther and needed to go through some sort of trial, or at least one we needed to see, after all the ass he kicked in Civil War just felt unnecessary. And though Killmonger was a great villain, all in all it was another story about a king who basically gets dethroned and has to win back his crown, which is not the most original concept ever. We've also got another Guardians of the Galaxy film coming, and since I loved the first one and thought the second one was good but not as great as the first, I'm of course looking forward to this. Finally, there's Captain Marvel, and my biggest hope for this second film of hers is that she'll have a bit more personality in it than she had in her first film or in Endgame. Okay, now let's talk about Thor Love and Thunder, and for the record, unlike a lot of people weighing in on this topic, both for and against it, I've actually read the run in question, where in the comics Thor becomes unworthy and a new female Thor takes his place, one that eventually gets revealed to be Jane Foster. I also read the first few issues of Jane Foster's version of Thor in her own book, before I removed it from my poll list. And yeah, I know I'm a horrible person and a misogynist because I don't want to pay $4 every few weeks to read a story about a different Thor. But the thing is, I read Thor for Thor Odinson. I don't care who has the hammer, that's the character I love and have always been a huge fan of, as my name here on YouTube, Thor Skywalker, alludes to. I've always enjoyed both mythology and comic books, so the merging of the two is something that I just naturally gravitated towards many years ago and have loved ever since. So when Jane Foster became Thor, to be completely honest and open, I just didn't have any real interest in it anymore. But I still gave it a chance and ultimately didn't enjoy it for what it was. That said, I have no doubt that Thor Love and Thunder is going to follow in the footsteps of Ragnarok and be pretty much a straight up comedy, especially considering we have the same director on board. It's probably going to be funny and I'll more than likely end up enjoying it for what it is. Now, what do I mean by that exactly? Well, again, I like the character of Thor Odinson from the comics, and in the first 2 Thor movies and the first Avengers film, he was largely based off that character, and I liked and appreciated that. They certainly weren't one and the same, but you could see inspiration was being drawn from the comic books. In Ragnarok, that's all thrown out the window, and we're given a brand new iteration of Thor that is pretty much nothing like the one from the first few films, and absolutely nothing like the one from the comic books anymore. But I still liked the film and Chris Hemsworth's version of the character for what it is, and I'll likely enjoy Love and Thunder for what it is too. And to briefly touch more on this whole race and gender swapping of characters for a moment, I don't understand how this is seen as a positive thing to do. especially for children who are oftentimes the ones it's being done for, supposedly. Because isn't the idea here to teach kids not to see race and gender and to treat everyone equally no matter what they look like or who they are? But then you change the race or gender of a character and tell them now they can relate to this character. Now this character is for you because they couldn't relate to them before because their skin color was different or their gender was wrong. Aren't we sending conflicting messages here? And another thing, being upset about the race or gender change of a character you love and have maybe loved your whole life is not the same thing as wanting to see only white male characters on screen. People really need to stop conflating the two and making up this false argument. If you're upset that Thor is being turned into a woman, it doesn't mean you hate all women and think they should never get prominent roles in films. A lot of the same people who are upset about Thor are thrilled to death that Black Widow is getting a movie, so try to wrap your head around that one. It's just that they don't want to see Thor turned into a woman. It's that simple. And really, no one is saying they only want white male characters in films, outside of a very, very small number of people who should just be ignored, not constantly highlighted or talked about. And the other day, in the comments section of an older video of mine where I said something similar to what I'm saying here, I got into a discussion with someone that went back and forth maybe a dozen times, and eventually the topic of race switching characters came up, and they had the stance that race isn't relevant to a character and it can be fluid, I believe is the way they put it. That is until I asked the person how they would feel if the character of Shaft was changed from a black guy to a white guy. Their response was, you can't change the race of Shaft because being black is an integral part of the character and changing it would fundamentally change the whole character. I then said that I agreed and asked him if he thought people would then have the right to get upset if they did change the race of Shaft. Oddly enough, I didn't receive a reply after that, likely because this person saw the trap coming. Because if we're being completely fair here, how can you say it's okay to get upset about a black character being changed to white, but not a white one being changed to another color? Why is there a double standard? And yeah, characters have been whitewashed in the past, as it's called, and I don't condone that either. The goal should always be to learn from the mistakes of the past, not to repeat them because you think you can get it right this time. If you want to say that whitewashing was or is still wrong, how can we say doing it the other way around is right? And that's the problem I have with identity politics. There's no feasible goal or end game with them. Because at what point do we stop trying to tear certain groups of people down in order to prop others up? What standard are we using to measure how fair the world is? Because there's no way to balance everything out perfectly. There's no way to have every single group of people always equally represented in every situation, especially when we can just keep breaking people down into smaller and smaller groups. Basically, at what point will we consider people as individuals again and judge each and every one of them on their own merits, instead of what members of privileged or oppressed groups they're a part of? Well, that's all I've got for this time. Hopefully you enjoyed some part of this video, whether it be the quick recap of movies and shows coming in Phase 4 of the MCU, or my little rant at the end, or maybe both. Either way, let me know what you think in the comments below, and let's talk some Marvel. And until next time, thanks for watching.